Hey everybody, hope you're doing good. Today I'm going to show you how I made this cute little two-piece from upcycled clothes.
So to complete this project, you will need a few items. First and foremost, you'll need a sewing machine, or you can hand sew if you want, and then fabric. All of this is from old clothes, but of course you can get new fabric or use whatever you have on hand. This is just an old cup from a bando. You can get cups that come by themselves, or you can take that out of an old bra or a bikini. You don't even actually have to use this, but I just like it because it gives extra thickness to the top. So next for the project, we'll be using some border. So I actually thrifted a couple of rolls of this, and it's probably one of my favorites. You can use plain fabric or whatever kind of border you'd like, but for this specific look, I do like the eyelet fabric. I think it works really well. So of course you'll want pins when we're cutting everything and trying to get it together how it should be. It's very, very handy. Elastic for the skirt. You can do a zipper if you really want to, but I think for the flowiness of it, the elastic works a little bit better in this case. So for cutting, you can use like a rotary cutter, scissors, or if you have an electric cutter, that would be really nice. So a seam ripper, that's always nice to have in case you need to take apart clothing that you're going to be using, or if you make mistakes while you're sewing. So, and here I have a bobby pin. So whenever we go to do the straps, we'll have to sew those face to face. So it'll be inside out and we'll have to turn it right side out. So there's a trick to do that with a bobby pin if it's a little bit too tight of a space or thin strap. Okay, so that is pretty much all of the products that you'll need. And of course, if you're going to be using something like a rotary cutter, you'll want to use like a cutting board or a cutting mat behind it so that you don't mess up any of your furniture or your floors. So in the burgundy set for the skirt, there was already a cord in the skirt that I chopped up to make this. And then also the waistband is pretty thick and it has shirring in it with elastic string. So I don't have elastic string or cording, so we're just going to do a plain elastic band in the teal set. So for this first set, this was actually one skirt. So this top part and the bottom part was together and it was about knee length. I never wore it. I don't really like that length of a skirt, so I wanted to make it more ankle length. So we added in this border here. So now we're just going to kind of copy and paste, but in a different color. So now we're just going to kind of go over the pieces that I chose and why. So I never wear this. I don't like the fit of it, but it's kind of like, I guess, a baby doll fit, if you would. It's very, very short, but it does have pockets in this one. So we're going to be using this for the top part of the skirt. So we'll put elastic here. And then we'll chop off the top piece of it and use it in the top. And then for the bottom of the skirt, I have this top here. So I'm just going to actually cut off the teal part of this and we're going to use it in the bottom. We can plan out our stripes however we want. My plan of action though, I do kind of like to have one that kind of matches the skirt. This is just an old tank top that doesn't fit. A darker color. This has already been used before, but it's just an old t-shirt. And then I would say another medium range color, but I didn't really have any. But I do have this old dress that I think would match perfectly with these stripes. So this is just an old dress that I thrifted. I liked it at the store, but when I got home, it just looked way too much like a candy cane, and I didn't really like it. Now for the other colors, I'm going to be using the same white. So I have this old lace that I cut out of the back of an old shirt. And then this very satiny looking fabric that was an old tank top. And then of course we're going to be using the same border. So now that we have all of our fabrics laid out, we can just choose which order that we want our patchwork to go in. So this is the order that I chose. You can use as few or as many colors as you want here. Me personally, like I chose this order specifically. We've got this lace pattern here and we've got a stripe here. So I did some solid colors in between to give that some separation. So you just want to kind of be mindful of things like that if it matters to you. Okay, now the first part that we are going to tackle here is going to be the top piece of the skirt, because the width is actually going to depend on how many of these squares that you're going to have. So in this case, I probably won't end up cutting it. It looks like it's going to be pretty similar to the size of that without doing much. So I'll probably just end up having to chop this and sew in the elastic. So you do actually have quite a bit of freedom when you're making the skirt. So if you're working with a skirt that is already made and you're just going to be chopping it up, this should be super easy for you. You'll probably just have to cut it, if that, and then sew stuff. But if you're working with something like this, or just raw fabric, then we'll need to know a little bit about the size just to make sure everything will be okay. Now, for example, when you are doing flowy skirts, you do have a little bit more freedom because of the flowiness. You don't have to have it a tight size. So this one is a little bit of a more narrow fit, but it is still flowy. But we do have a couple of inches extra fabric on this, which is going to make it a little bit more extra flowy. So I'm just going to leave it the same size that it is, and I'll show you the difference in the two sizes and the amount of fabric that we're going to have in the waistband and the hip area. And then from that point, you're just going to kind of make a trapezoid and keep flaring it out. So to get your waist measurement, you'll just want to go to the smallest part of your waist. You make sure it's lined up. If you're doing an exact fit, you may want to make sure that you have as little clothes on as possible, but this will be fine since it doesn't have to be exact. So we've got 30 for the waist, and then for the hip area, you want to make sure that you're getting your butt in there too. We've got about 38 to 39. Okay, so you just want to make sure that you have at least that, and probably add 2 to 5 inches depending on how flowy you want your skirt to be. So in this one, before the elastic, it looks like the waist is going to be about 18 inches. So we'll want to make sure that we have enough shrinkage to where that's about 14 for the top measurement, or 28 to 29 total. And then we'll go down to the pockets, which is where the hip is going to be. And then that's going to be a total of 44 inches. So you can see we've got a couple of extra inches on this. So with this particular piece, we do have pockets on here, so we wouldn't want to lose those. So if we do want to shrink it up, it actually has a back seam here. So you would want to rip this seam open and then shrink it from there to keep your pockets intact. So we just want to lose as little of the fabric as possible. And again, you can seam rip this if you want, but I just prefer to cut it. You guys, this is probably why you should just go ahead and cut it one layer at a time. It's okay. So now I am just going to begin to pin my elastic band in, and then we're going to sew it. So first we just need to turn this to where it's the outside in. There you go, we can see our pockets there. So, disclaimer, I am not a professional at doing elastic bands. I'm still kind of learning them, but whenever I begin to sew this, I'll just kind of hold tension on this and keep the fabric with it. So you'll have the fabric tight, and then you'll also pull the elastic tight, and then it'll bunch up like that, if that gives you a visual. And then you'll just keep sewing. If you need to stop sewing and then readjust, pull more, and then, you know, as it, make sure that you're keeping constant tension, because if you have different amounts of tension when you're doing this, then your elastic is going to be kind of all over the place as far as the consistency of it. Okay, so now I'm just going to kind of pin this into place how I would like to sew it, and then we'll begin. We're just making sure that we're keeping everything straight. You also just, again, want to make sure that we have enough to fold over. So I've come down about, depending on the width of your elastic, I've come down about, we'll say like ½ an inch more than the width of the elastic. Is that right? Yeah, that's close. Maybe closer to like 1/4 of an inch. But anyway, you just want to make sure that you have enough excess fabric to where you can at least come over and serge over this edge. Okay. So I'm going to quit wasting time and begin pinning this now. You want to make sure that you're getting one layer at a time. And before you sew it, you'll definitely want to turn it right side out just to make sure that you don't have anything caught. Okay, now I've got that pinned at the beginning where I want it, and what I'm going to do now is actually trace this with a line of chalk, because when I begin sewing this, I'm going to be pulling this more than I'm going to be pulling this, so it's going to be a little bit of a difference. So the stitch types that we're going to be using for this project are just a number 2 straight stitch, and then number 3 on here, just a zigzag overlock. So to begin with, when we're sewing this in, we'll be using the number 2 straight stitch. So we're going to pull it tight, make sure our fabric is lined up, and then pull from the back so that it's easier on your sewing machine. Stop sewing once you get to the end there, and then you're going to do it again. So pull tight, pull your fabric even, but don't overstretch it. Okay, so everything is stitched down. So now I'm just going to try it on and make sure it fits the way that I want it to. So I am in fact happy with how the elastic band turned out. So something I did forget to mention about the elastic is cut the elastic the size that you want your waist to be, or even maybe just a tiny bit smaller, no more than an inch probably. So I did want my waist to be at about 28 to 29 inches. I didn't measure this because I had it just laying around pre-cut, but that is a tip to help you get the waist size that you want, is to cut your elastic down to the size that you want it to cinch your fabric. You can see we've got pretty even elasticity around here with our little, I don't know what to call it, pleats, but not exactly. Fabric bunching. I'm not a sewist, I'm just a beginner, guys. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Now what we're going to do is come through and sew this down to the back to cover the elastic so it's not irritating. Okay, so I am happy with just the single stitch and an overlock down the center, or kind of through the center. My sewing is not straight. And then I'm going to fold it over and we're going to do an overlock on the edge as well. And we're going to sew it from the inside of the skirt. Okay, so I am actually going to pin this down though, the way that I want it. Alright, so now that everything is all sewn in, it could be sewn in a little bit straighter. And some of the elastic spots turned out a little bit wonky. Like right here. This one, when it's on, it just folds a little bit weird, but that's okay. I'm just going to iron some pleats in it and it'll look fine. But other than that, we just need to cut off all the extra strings and the excess fabric. Now, whenever you're cutting, be careful not to cut through your actual skirt as well. So now we just need to see the difference in what this length and what this length is going to be. This is going to be the bottom piece, so we need to see if there's going to be an even amount of distance between these, or if there needs to be a slope, so I'll need to cut triangle pieces if it's too much. But it looks like we should be pretty close. I think that we should be able to stick with just doing squares, but we'll go ahead and just double check. Yep, so it looks like they're pretty much exact, so we're just going to continue and cut out our squares just like I did the same with the last skirt. So in this skirt, I think I used about 4 of each color, so I'm sure I'll need at least that for this one. I'm low on this, so hopefully I have enough to make it through the skirt and the top. Or if you want, you can be extremely precise and have them all exact. So like you see, this one is probably about 1.5 inches, and this one is much wider, probably about 2.5 inches. So you can do different things like that to mix it up if you'd like as well. So now I'm just going to kind of take these as a guide. And then we're just going to cut straight up from here. So now that we've gotten all of our rectangles cut out, you just need to lay them out in the order that you'd like to have it. Okay. So to begin, you want to take one piece of fabric. This is the front, this is the back. You're going to have the front face up. You're going to take the next color in your row, and then you're going to take the front of that fabric and put it face to face with this. So this is the front. So what we're going to do at this point is just sew these two together. So you're going to just do one line down one edge. So when you open it up, it'll look like this. And then you're going to continue down your color line, put this one face to face with the white square, and then sew it down the side, and then you open it up and it'll be like that. Okay, so we'll get started. And you can pin these together if you want, but with them being so small, I find that it's really not necessary. We'll finish it off by doing a reverse stitch and then letting it go forward again, just to kind of help tie the ends in. Alright, so this is where we are starting with the skirt today. I've got all of my patchwork done. I have it laid out how I want to sew it, so I'm not going to pull it apart, but I have it all there. And then I've also been kind of working on how I want to design the top. So on the last one, I did more of a bikini style, and on this one, I think I want to do it kind of like a sweetheart style. And then instead of doing a halter top, which is really easy, you just have like the one single and you fit it to your neck and sew it. I am just going to take the straps and probably the back of this tank top here and use that. So I'll see what else I decide to do with the straps, or if I'm going to do any ties on the back. But I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to do the same pattern that I used there, but do the same strips of the patchwork and then attach the lace to the bottom as well. So before I begin sewing this into our skirt, we're going to cut off all of the excess fabric and then any strings that are going to be left over. And then to get the length of the ruffle that we are going to need, we're going to do the same thing. You're going to put it where it needs to be placed, and then we're going to just fold that in half to get the length that we'll need. And then I just like to add like an extra inch or so just to make sure that you have a little bit of extra sewing space if you need it. And then while we're at it, we'll go ahead and cut the one for the next layer as well. So now we are going to begin attaching everything. So we have our patchwork here. This is the back of the patchwork. This is the border, and so the border is face up. So we have the back of the border and then the back of the patchwork touching each other there. So you want to have this to where this is the top of your patchwork, and if your border is like mine and you have a certain way that it needs to go, then you're going to sew it to where you can fold it over and it will be correctly positioned. So just make sure that you double check everything before you actually sew it in. It'll save you some trouble if you've got it wrong. Now, how I am going to do this with my particular kind, I'm going to line this up to where I have about a 1/4 inch above this eyelet. So I'll sew it all the way down this line to make sure that I have everything evenly stitched and I don't miss any of my patches and I have them like hanging down from my skirt. Because that did happen to me after I washed it. I did have a few places where my stitches came loose. So this time I'm being really good about going with a straight stitch and then going over it with an overlock, and then also making sure that I'm sewing everything as neatly as I can. So we're just going to begin pinning this down now so that we can keep everything straight. Now that you've done that, you just want to check on the front side and make sure that everything is completely secured. So you want to make sure that if you have somewhere where you have a close call like this, like that is very close. You can see I've got just like a tiny hole there. That would honestly be fine since I'm going to fold it over and sew it down anyway. But mainly here, I'm just making sure that, at least like 95% of this is sewn down. Ideally 100%, but I'm willing to accept my mistakes here. Alright, so at this point you have a choice. You can either come back around and sew this together in a circle, all of your patchwork, and then connect it to the skirt, or you can connect it to the skirt and then connect the ends of your patchwork through here. So it's up to you, whichever you think is going to be easiest for you. It doesn't really make that big of a difference. As long as you have tested all of your patchwork and made sure that it lines up and is the even and proper amount, then you can go ahead and sew it in the round. If you're not sure, then I would go ahead and sew it straight like this and then connect it. That way, if you need to cut off any of your patches or add more, it'll be a little bit easier if it's already disconnected rather than having to seam rip and add in new stitches. So it's kind of up to you, but So the last time that I sewed, so when I sewed the red set, I had connected it into a circle and then sewed it to the skirt. So this time I think I'm going to try it the other way. I'm going to leave it like this, and then we're going to begin sewing it from the end and wrap around. You can start your seam wherever you want. You could start the end in the front middle, in the back middle, on either of the sides, wherever. Hopefully your seam will not be super noticeable when everything is connected. So the way that we are going to attach this, you're going to turn this skirt inside out, and then we're going to flip this over. So what we want to do is put these face to face. So I'm going to kind of flip up the edge of the skirt a little bit to where I can see the front of the fabric, and then I'm going to place the front of this border to the front of the fabric, starting wherever you want your seam to be. And then you're just going to pin this down the line so that we can have it secure when you go to sew it, sewing from the back side of either the border or the skirt. And then whenever you go to turn your skirt right side out, it will be secured like this. And you'll have a nice seam. It's a little bit bunched up there, but everything will look folded and you won't be able to see any of the sewn seams like that. Alright, so update just before I get too far into this, I wanted to let y'all know I am going to sew this in the round before I sew everything, because I can already tell that this is going to kind of be a pain to make sure that everything is attached and that I have the seam like I want it if everything is already sewn together. So I just want to make sure that I have this seam straight and not all wonky, and then we'll begin sewing this. So I shouldn't even have to unpin this, but I just want to make sure it's right before I get all of that other stuff done. So again, it's up to you which order you want to do it in, but I think that this is going to be easiest for me. All right. So I've gotten my circle sewn together. I do have a seam on the outside. I didn't think about that, but honestly, it's not that bad. It's not super noticeable. But other than that, I have everything pinned together, and all we need to do now is just sew along this line. So again, I'm going to do a straight stitch, and then I'm going to come back with an overlock stitch. Okay, so I'm done stitching everything with just a straight stitch. Looks like I missed a little place there. I need to go through and just double check that, but you can see here, this is what it'll look like from the front. Let me get that facing the right way. So this will be the top of the skirt, we have our border, and then we have our patchwork. Let me go ahead and get this overlocked in, and then we'll do a full view on it. Okay, so now I'm just going to repeat that same exact process that I did with the last tier. I'm going to pin this, and then we're going to sew. We're going to do a straight stitch, and then an overlock. And then we're going to come back and iron this down, and then we will attach the bottom tier. Alright, good morning everyone. So I've just been kind of working on our blue top this morning to try and figure out exactly how I wanted to do everything, because I knew I wanted to do the top a little bit differently. So let me just catch you up. All I've done is just put together a patchwork, which if you've seen the skirt, we did that the same exact way. The only difference here is you may want to do your patches shorter. That's up to you and how long you want the top to be. And then we'll be working on our straps here. So I did one, and I didn't have enough fabric with the blue, so I ended up having to do them just a little bit thinner than the red. So you can see the red connected all the way down to the patch, and this is not going to connect all the way down. Also, we are going to be working on the cups. I got this one together. I'm just trying to figure out the band there, so we'll do another one like that, or similar, hopefully better. And then I've just put together a cup here. So these are more of a rounded style, and instead of just completely overlaying the top, I did like a face-to-face and turned it right side out, and then attached this. So that's going to cover our side boob there. And then we have our tie strings. So I'm still undecided on this if I want to do 2 separate tie strings or just do one connecting for the neck. So that is to be decided. I believe I am going to do the 2 separate tie strings. I actually cut these off of the straps on the shirt. So I'm going to reuse these, but I'll show you how to make straps if you need to do that. It's really easy. Now we'll start with our waistband straps. Those. So ideally you'll want to have it something like this shape. This is actually from a halter top pattern, but I kind of went off the rails. This one is 22 inches long, and what do we have? And about 6 inches wide at the longest point and about 2 inches at the shortest. So you don't have to do it exactly like that. Like I said, this strap is smaller than that strap, so you just want to get something that you can tie it around your back with. That's the main thing. It doesn't even have to be in this shape. You can do it in a straight rectangle too. So you'll want to cut out 4 pieces of the fabric in that shape. So make sure that you have them turned correctly. You can fold the fabric and cut multiples at a time. But just keep in mind that we are going to be doing a front to front and then turning it right side out. All right, so cut out 4 pieces of fabric that are going to be in that shape or somewhere around that length. And then what you're going to do is take 2 of them and place them face to face and pin them. Make sure that you have them in the right direction. This is the back and this is the front. And then we're just going to pin this together. Try and unroll it here. Some of these like polyester fabrics, they roll up really easy. Now when we pin this together, we're going to leave this side open and pin the other 3 sides. So leave the big side open because we're going to sew it into other fabrics and then sew the other 3 shut. My dogs have been helping a lot. Let's try and get some of this hair off. So now we're just going to go around and do a straight stitch all the way around these 3 sides and then come back around and do an overlock over top of this straight stitch. Remember, keep the large side open. So now we're just going to cut off all of the excess fabric and any strings that are hanging down. You shouldn't need to do any kind of tricks to get this one. It should turn right side out pretty easily. So really quickly, we'll just go over all of the pieces that I used to make this. So first of all, I just have an old bathing suit cup that I put in there. If you've seen in the beginning, I did actually have this one that I was going to use, but I changed my mind. I decided that I just wanted to try and do 2 separate so that I could place it how I wanted. Anyway, so we've got a cup and then I have 2 pieces of fabric, one for the front and one for the back. You can do these in matching colors if you prefer, but I did not have enough of the light blue. And then also we need a piece of our little border, and that will go there. And then here, this is just a piece of fabric that already has a finished edge on it that we're going to be using for our little triangle piece. If you do not already have fabric with a finished edge, you'll just fold it over and sew over it just like that. Now the very first thing that we are going to do is pin the front of this, the light blue, to the pad here. And I believe I mentioned it in the beginning as well, the bra padding is totally optional. You can just do the layers of fabric and skip this part if you want. Okay, so now we are just going to go around and pin this and try and keep everything as flat as possible. That is good enough. We won't worry about that one little space there. So now what we are going to do is flip this over to the back side, and then along the very edge of this, we're going to come through and do a straight stitch to connect these 2 pieces. You're going to go all the way around. Now that we've got that done, we just want to pin this in place how we want it. We've got that cup over there, so we want to do this one opposite like that. And we just want to do our best to make these as alike as possible. That was a little bit of a problem with my last top. They were just a little bit off. So I'm going to try to make them perfectly symmetrical. But we have this all pinned down again across the front, and we tacked our ends down. We don't have to fold this over. We're going to sew that down, so don't worry about it. So we're going to go to our sewing machine and sew across the outer edge, just following the ribbon, but sew from the back, so from here. And we're going to do another straight stitch. Okay, now we are just going to attach the back of the cup and we'll be able to cover up all of these rough edges. So now we just want to take our sewn cup and the back piece of fabric, preferably in the same color, or if you would like to have like a little nice color edge, that works too. Like I said, I ran out of the light blue, so we're working with this. And then also I forgot, you can cut off, if you have a lot of extra, you cut that off or it'll make lumps inside the cup. Okay, that's fine with that much. But we're just going to take and put these face to face. So we're going to take the front of that cup, find the front piece of fabric. Okay, so this is the front and this is the back. So we're going to put front to front, make sure we have our shapes aligned correctly. Okay, perfect. So now this time what we want to do is again sew around the edge, except this time we're going to leave the bottom of the cup open. So now we're going to go around with another straight stitch along the very edge here. Try and keep it as close to the outside as possible and make sure that you're sewing everything, and leave this open so that we can turn it right side out. Okay, I've ran through and did a straight stitch along the top part. Remember, we leave the bottom open on this one. And now I'm just going to go through and do an overlock stitch to make sure everything is good and secured. And remember, we're leaving the bottom open still, so we're just going over that straight stitch. I don't know, I missed a spot. I'll have to turn that inside out again and then re-sew that, but I think that you get the general idea. I said that like 3 different times and still missed a spot. That's crazy. So let me just fix that real quick and then we will attach this piece. Okay, so I've got that hole patched up and these are pretty symmetrical. The point seems to be slightly off up here, but honestly, it's not a big deal. I'll be able to cover it with my straps. So I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. I would have been a little bit happier if I had the same color blue, but that's fine. And then what we're going to do now is connect this piece. So this really just helps hold the cup to the waistband and keep everything together nicely. So like I said before, if you don't already have something with a finished edge, then you can just fold over your fabric and make sure that it does. You don't want to leave something with just like a bare cut edge. And if you don't want to fold it over and stitch it, you can also just do an overlock down the side. So now that we've covered that, to connect the piece, what you'll want to do is, first of all, you need to line it up. Or the way that I did it is I lined it up with the waistband so that we could get the angle that we would need. So we've got this. And I'll have another strip of fabric, but I'm just using this. You can use whatever you need to that is straight. You can use a ruler. So what you want to do is, one, make sure that they're symmetrical. And then we are just going to connect this. Just drag this and set it over top. And then continue dragging this until you have the angle that you want it to be. And make sure that you have your cup straight. And another way that you could do this is to just trace the other side. So to get your first shape, you'll need to do it this way. But once you've gotten it the first time, then you can just take it and flip it over. So I could just take this piece and just trace that. So now that you have it approximately at the size that you want, what you'll just need to do is sew it on there. So I'll wait to cut off this excess fabric later because I'm going to be using this to sew some of the lower pieces together. But what we are going to do, so what we are going to do here, because we want this face to face, is actually just flip that over, but we want to sew it from the back. So we're going to hold it and flip it, but make sure that you have that turned over. And then we're just going to come through and sew right along this seam. And there might be better ways to do this, like you can see on this side that I ended up having some string where I had trouble getting that to connect. But just try and do the best that you can. Like I said before, I'm definitely still a beginner, but with each project that I do, I feel like I have massive improvements. Okay, so I've got those finished up. They're pretty even. At the same time that I came through and sewed this across, I did actually come through and do a straight stitch just across the bottom. You can see I have a little bit of blue on the edges here. That doesn't bother me. But like I said, it'll be a little bit easier on you if you use the same color fabric. And then I also just cut off the excess fabric that was inside, at least most of it. Okay, so now we are just going to move on to the next part of this, which is going to be attaching a band right here. All I've done to get this, I have this eyelet border here. I cut off a chunk the length of what my patchwork is. Oh, got a seam there. And then I just cut that in half. So I'm going to have an eyelet and our scalloping on the bottom part. And then I took this with that extra scrap fabric and just folded it over so it's less sheer. So at this point, all we need to do is figure out where we want the cups placed in comparison to our patchwork. So this is the center of my band. So I'm just going to kind of place these pretty much exactly where they're at. So to do this, what we'll want to do in this case again, so we want to go front to front with our border and our cup here. So we would just flip that over like so, and then we want to pin this straight across as we can. Now when we pin this, we want to pin it on our bottom side of what we have showing here. Now this is probably one of the trickiest parts to get even aside from the cups themselves. So especially if you have them to where they are curved like this, it may be in your best interest to go ahead and cut them straight before even getting to this point. Okay, so I've got one there. And when we come through and sew this along the edge, it's going to flip down and look like this. All right, I've gotten everything sewed. It did go up there a little bit at the center, but it does look a lot better than the last top, I do believe. So everything is lined up nicely. It's pretty symmetrical. I think that this is my only complaint with the top for the most part. So I'm happy with how that turned out. Now we're going to attach the patchwork. So of course, make sure that you have it the same direction that your skirt is going. I had mine flipped around backwards the last time. And then you're just going to center it up and we're going to do the same thing. You're going to sew them face to face. So flip that over, and then we're going to sew along this line as close to the edge as we can. Make sure that you have all your patchwork cut even. It'll help out a lot. Next, we're going to do our straps. And these are the back ties, not the neck ties. So we're going to take our wide end and connect it up here. So you want to make sure that you have that. And this can be any length that you want. So this is going to kind of hang free. It can connect all the way down if you want, or it can connect just here. And then if you have any that is unfinished or not connected, we're just going to come through here and do an overlock stitch down the sides. I'm going to do that after I attach the ribbon because we'll have to do it down the side of it as well. All right, now for the back ties, we're just going to lay this face to face and pin everything straight through here. Okay, and then we just have to do a straight stitch and an overlock. I've got my overlock stitch done for my back ties. Now I'm actually just going to continue down this patchwork piece because I've got it lined up perfectly anyway. And now it should look something like this. So that is connected really nicely. And then we have this down the edge, just to keep our fabric from fraying. And I'll probably run down the side of that 1 or 2 more times. Okay, now we're going to do the other side. Here in the home stretch now, all we have to do are attach our straps, which I just cut off of an old shirt. If you want to create your own straps, you'll do it the same exact way that we did these, but in whatever shape and length that you want. Remember, face to face, and then turn it right side out. And then we just have to attach this bottom border. Maybe I should have done that before attaching it here, but I think it'll be fine. Mostly just because it'll be a little bit easier to move around without all of that. So what we are going to do to attach the bottom border is, first of all, you want to make sure that you have all of your patchwork spread out. So make sure it's flat and not wrinkled up anywhere. And then you'll want to probably actually try it on to see where you want the patchwork to come down to if you have not done that already. I definitely recommend that you measure and make sure that everything is on track at this point. So I might have to move that up a little bit because they should be at 8.5. Looks like everything is pretty even across here. Now, in order to attach this is another one that we are going to do face to face. So this is the correct position. What we'll want to do in order to sew it is actually just flip it now that we've got it where we want it to be sewn at. And we've measured everything. So just try and do your best to keep that straight and keep your measurements right. If you need to, go ahead and go back and measure again. Okay, so real quick, I did come through here and do the straight stitch, and I still need to do the overlock, but I figured before I do that, I would just trim the edges of my border in the shape that I want it, because I'm going to come through and do an overlock on the side of this as well, so none of it frays. And then I'm also probably going to come through and do another round of the overlock down the side of the patchwork. So I will meet you back when I've done that, and I will also trim off the excess here.
So now that we've went through and did our overlock down the sides, we just want to sew down the straps. Again, you can do one single necktie or you can do two that you're going to tie around, whatever you can come up with. And I'm just going to do a straight stitch in kind of a square or a rectangle to get that secured. I did it over the white lace so that you wouldn't be able to see it, and I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. Now with these straps, the great thing is you can tie these in all different ways with the thin straps. So pretty much any of the different ways that you can tie a bikini, you can tie this, and I think it looks so cute. Yay, we're done. So now to style it, I just wear it with some vintage emerald earrings, which I don't think the emerald is real in those, and then a hair stick that matched too perfectly not to wear it. And I also have this brown bag and strappy shoes, kind of like gladiator sandals. And I apparently really like this color because here's a matching sweater too. Well, that is going to be it for today's video. It was a long one, so thank you if you watched all the way through. If any of y'all end up making this, I'd love to hear about the variations that you do on it. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you have a great day. Bye!